the amazing thing is that Spiro has an amazing history on Mount Athos, and um, he is actually the person who is repairing a lot of the major clocks, clock towers, and also the smaller clocks. Some of them like 200-300 years old, 400 years old. Very valuable clocks. Some of these clocks are worth like just the little ones are worth like 40,000 euros. And Spiro knows how to repair these. And with his beautiful wife Lynn and their lovely family um, in Wales, they allow Spirit to go and do this great work of preservation on Mount Athos. There's a couple of chairs here. There's a chair over here too. So we're very blessed that Lynn came to see her brother in Sydney, and because of that, Spiro came to Sydney, and because Spiro is a good friend of us from the monastery, from Spiridon, especially my brother, Father Jeremiah, who actually he has taught him a lot of the trade as well. So we're very privileged, and thank you for that again, Spiro. And today he's going to talk about time on Mount Athos. And sorry about the place because we've got a memorial downstairs. The hall is taken. Um, so we'll just wait for Haran to go out. But welcome, Spiro. I'll let you do the talking.
Yeah, thank you.
And all the best
Yeah.
today. We appreciate the time. I came by bus from the city because there was no trains. So we appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. My name is Spiro Azzopardi. I've lived in Wales most of my life since I was 5. I'm an engineer by trade and was in research for 35 years in the UK and now retired. I wasn't expecting to give this talk today, but Constantine threw it on me, and here I am. So I had to prepare something in a rush, but there we go. I've cobbled a few things together, and I hope to give you an insight in some of the work that I do on Mount Athos. So I might just sit down for a while, and then I can carry on. When you all came this morning, you set your alarms and times, and clocks were all around you, and it was quite easy to know the time that you need to come to the church. But 1,000 years ago, people, they had no instruments to tell time. They would tell time by the day when it was light, when the body clock would tell them when to eat, and at night, when it got dark, people just went to sleep. But if people were going to church at that time, there was a clock, and that was the church clock, which was the bell. And that would ring and summon people to attend the church. Now, the word clock never meant what we perceive it to be today. It actually, in many European countries, it means bell. So the word is not what we know as a clock. Okay, the bell would ring, people would go to church. But how did the people who rang the bell know what time it was? They would use a number of instruments, mainly the sun. So they would set time by the sun, but the sun doesn't shine every day. So they would have water clocks. Water clocks was quite common, especially in Greece. The word would be clepsydra, water stealer, it translated. And that was a clock that was used back in ancient history, right through to probably about 300 or 400 years ago. And that was one of the main instruments that the monasteries used to measure time. But there were others. There were, we said, sundials, water clocks, candle clocks. They would mark time by how much the candle would burn, and they would know from experience what the time was based on that. There were sand clocks. So using sand in an hourglass. That was another method. So they had several instruments at their disposal to tell time. And the first reference that we have about time on Athos was Saint Athanasius of Lavra. Now, he was one of the first monks to establish a monastery on Mount Athos. And one of his tools to regulate the monastery, and one of the main tools, was a water clock. And in his Typicon, which is a set of rules, he talks about the signal of the water clock strikes, so that he must have had there was some sort of alarm. So water clocks can be very simple by having a bowl with a little hole at the bottom that drips water, and the level would be measured, and that would equate to a time. But there could be more complicated clocks than that, whereby you can incorporate an alarm, and I guess this one had an alarm. Now, Saint Athanasius was quite an educated man. He came from Constantinople. When he was orphaned when he was young, and was taken in by a nun, and that inspired him to become a monk in later life. So when he went to Mount Athos, he knew, he was quite educated, he would know how to build a water clock. So this is what he says: the signal of the water clock strikes, and at this signal they immediately rise and sound the wooden semitron. So that's the earliest reference, that goes back to 970. Right. We talked about sundials. Now, this is the tower in Azzopardi, and there is a tower clock, but this is the bell tower. So behind the bell tower, if you ever visited there, you wouldn't see it. You'd have to go right behind the tower to see this clock. This clock was completely wiped out over the years, probably about over 100 years old. So the monks viewing this clock from their kellies would see this clock, but it was completely wiped out. So I was tasked to repaint the dial, take the old one off, and put a new one up based on the design of the old one. So that's what we're doing there. When I took the old dial off there, I had a big shock. I was up on the cherry picker, and when we took the old dial off, I had 8 bats flew out. Yeah, and when you're at that height, it's could be quite frightening. Yeah. So that's the dial there. It was the scaffolding was still there, and we just took this photograph of the dial. So this is the bell tower at Azzopardi. Another way that people sort of kept an eye on time was by this midday sundial. And this is a very simple dial. I don't know. I can't point to that. But you see the center line there, which was 12 o'clock, and you just had 1 hour before and 1 hour after. So the monks would use this to be able to tell time close to lunchtime, which was a very important part of the day for them. And they would have this on a stone, on a windowsill, somewhere which was facing south, preferably. But there's many on these, and this one I found on the floor of Azzopardi. And basically you have a little stick poking out, and that would give you an indication of time between 11, 12, and 1 o'clock. So that's another example of keeping time. Well, you would have a stick where the bees come together. You would have a stick poking out, vertical, and the sun would cast a shadow. And as the sun moved around, the shadow would move to the various times. Yeah. Okay, now the first reference of a clockmaker on Mount Athos was a monk called Lazar. He was a Serbian monk and came to the monastery of Hiljandar and was working there. He was part of the brotherhood there, and he built the first clock in the Kremlin in Moscow. So that's the first reference we have of a clockmaker on Mount Athos. Now, his legacy could be that, he came to Mount Athos possibly to build a clock there, and that monastery does have a clock. So this is the building of the Moscow in the 15th century, so in the 1400s. So he went there in 1404, but he was on Mount Athos in the late 1300s. And this is a little painting that we have in one of the chronicles of Russia, showing the monk and his clock. And the clock had, instead of numerals, it had letters, Serbian letters on there, or Russian letters, I guess. Now, not all clocks, when the first clocks came out, they didn't have these dials that we see showing the time. In fact, they just had a bell, and they would just strike a bell. Now, we're used to clocks striking 3 times for 3 o'clock, 4 times for 4 o'clock, but in the early clocks, they would only strike once every hour. And they're purely audio type of clocks. They didn't have no dials, and even if they did have dials, people wouldn't be able to. They couldn't understand them. They wouldn't know what numbers meant or what, apart from the educated few. So the dial came on later, and I'll show you some examples of that. Now this is Hiljandar Monastery, and this is the clock tower. You can see it's not, the photos, I'm afraid, not all that brilliant, but there is a copper dial clock there, and this is the clock. Now this clock is being mostly destroyed because they commissioned a company in Serbia to come and restore this clock and get it to go. And what they've done is put plastic wheels on there. You see this wheel at the top is a plastic wheel. I don't know if I can point. Can I point for that? No, it doesn't work. Okay. If you press this. Oh. Oh, wow. Okay. You learn something every day. Okay. Okay. This wheel is made out of plastic, and here we have bearings that they use in motor vehicles there and there. And the wooden frames they put on, it's an addition, so they removed the iron bars and put these wooden frames on there. So if I just go back, you can see all these sort of wooden frames. So they partly destroyed this clock, unfortunately. But this could have been, it's of the period, and it could have been one of the clocks that Lazar may have made. We don't know. We found an inscription on the clock that dates 1795. And the inscription we got in the recognized numerals, but also in Ionic Greek numerals alongside A, Alpha, Gamma, Psi, and E, which is translates to that date. So that's the earliest date we have there. But I know from the design of the clock, it really dates before 1650. So it's possible that Lazar might have made this clock. This is a drawing of the monastery of Padrocato, and this was one of the first large tower clocks that I went to restore. And you're limited in what tools are available and what you can use when you're working on these things, because you can only use what they have within the monastery. And this is a view of the monastery. And some of the most beautiful sceneries, all these monasteries are on the close to the sea, and they are so spectacular to visit. And I'm blessed that I've been going there since for 24 years and working there and living there. And if you split up all the times, I usually go for about a month, maybe longest I've been is 2 months. But if you add those periods together, I probably lived on Mount Athos for about 3 years. Yeah. Not to my wife's delight, I must say. And this is one of the images of the bell tower and the tower clock. And this little dot there is what I believe to be the drawing of the clock that remained there. And this clock was very early. It was about 1450 to 1500s. And this is the old dial. Now, these clocks are extinct in Europe. There's probably only about, they say there was only about 7 to 10 of these clocks left in Europe. But this is another one I can add to that list, because this clock was very complete. There is a date on there which says 1850, and it's very unusual for these clocks to be working in the 19th century. Most of them disappeared. And the reason they disappeared was because they converted the mechanism from from folio to pendulum. So the pendulums is the little swinging bulb that you see on most clocks today, and that came about in about 1650. So it's quite unusual to see a clock running in about 1815. So this is where the clock would have been. And one of the disadvantages being close to the sea is that everything rusts quite quickly. And this is the clock that was in the tower and the state that it was in. And when I seen it, it wasn't in the tower. They brought it down. And what I saw was this. I was really frightened when I seen this. I thought, how am I going to clean this? You can see the rust is, and not only to clean it, could you get it to work? So there was about 1 millimeter of rust all over the clock. And this little bit here is called the foliot. And this is the biggest rarity in these clocks, because they've disappeared. They don't exist anymore. And to find one is quite a rare find. And to show some of the examples of the work that we've been doing, this is this component here, which is missing, and this is an air brake. So the panels were missing, and next to it you see where we've added the panels and repaired some of the pieces of metal that were missing there. These are some of the posts and just some comparisons of the repair work. Tulips were very popular in Turkey, and there was a period when the tulip design was on everything, but we see it here on their clocks. Of course, Turkey was occupied by, Mount Athos was occupied by the Turks, and some of the influences you can see on the design on some of these clocks. And okay, so there's a gear wheel. The teeth are barely recognizable on this one, but I was amazed on how well we could restore these and recover the teeth back to where they were. Now, the method of conservation was quite simple. We used a container which contained a piece of metal. Let's see if I can. Yeah, okay. We see a piece of metal there, and inside it was water. And I had to go to their bakery and take as much baking powder as they would allow me. And that was the recipe, was water and baking powder to clean these things. And of course, this power supply, which was a battery charger. And that's all it was. That's all that was needed to clean the rust. Now, the beauty of this system was that it didn't matter how long you maintained this process, it would only remove the rust and nothing else. Then I had to impose again on the abbot and ask him for a wine vat, which, okay, so there's the wine, 1,000-liter wine vat, which they use for wine. There's the battery charger. And to clean the frame, didn't want to dismantle it. So there's the frame of the clock. And we did half and half, turned it round. So that was the process of restoration. So you can see how badly caked this rust was. And but this clock actually ran. So there was it. Sorry, there's the clock at the end of it. But what we had to do, I had to impose on the abbot again, because we had to treat the clock so it wouldn't rust again. So I commandeered 13 tins of boot polish from the monks, and we formulated a wax to treat the clock, which it ended up looking, yeah. So there's the clock there. And this bit here, this is the bit that, if you find this part, really is, you found gold, because they just don't exist anymore. These are the bits they removed to convert the clocks to pendulum, and removed that and fitted a pendulum. So some of them were converted, they didn't destroy them completely, but that's the bit, if you find it, then you're lucky. One of the things that I do is I can use 3D modeling, so I can measure the parts and build a model of the clock, and bits that are missing I can model into the whatever's missing from there, and I can work out roughly what size it should be, how many teeth it should have. So modeling these clocks is part of what I do, and also it gives us something that we can refer back to in the future. So that's a model of the whole clock that we just looked at. And this probably about 200 hours worth to design this. And then finally, we're taking the clock after it's been restored into the monastery. The workshop was the other end of the monastery, and some of the fathers are helping us transport the clock. And it was placed not back in the tower, but in a position at the entrance of the church so that people could see it. But it was in working order when I left it. This is another monastery now, the Bulgarian monastery of Zographou. And this is not such an interesting clock, but it was one I was involved with. You see the dial up the top there, very badly done. The numbers are terrible. But underneath here, this area here, there was a dial built out of bricks, and wasn't in use anymore. But this dial was 24-hour dial, which is an indication that possibly there was a very early tower clock in this tower. So you can see the dial and the numerals. You can see number 9, is it 19, 17, 18, oh, 16, yes, 16. They invert it round then, because, yes. 16, 17, 18. Right, okay. This is Father Gabriel, and you can see the old dial there, which is very badly done, very badly done. And they were taking they took the top of the tower down so they can remove the clock. So they were lifting the clock from the top of the tower. And what you see behind there, so there's the dial, the one you can see, but behind it, there's another dial, a wooden one, which covers that. And I'll show you that a little bit further on. So there is a more modern clock from about the 1800s, maybe mid 1800s. So it's not a very early clock. And this is the way they lifted it out, with a crane from the top. But what's more interesting is what was covered by this hideous dial. And these are the dials that we found behind, these beautiful dials that we found behind those metal sheets. You can see the old ones there, we took them off. And it had 4 dials. Some of them were quite beautifully done. And look at the artwork, that's just been covered up. Now, the reason they did that is because the clock was so high up, the dial was too small for people to see the numbers. Now, this is an interesting monastery, Xenofonto. When I first went there, they asked me to look at the clock that was very badly damaged. And the reason it was damaged was, there's a little bit of a story. They were restoring the clock tower, and the monk responsible for the tower said to the workman, I want everything cleared out, all the rubbish taken out. I want the floor clean and nothing left up there. Now, the clock mechanism was already taken out and placed in a corner, and they didn't want to take the clock down because it was so difficult. So what they did is threw it out from the top window. Now, this was a 600-year-old clock, and this monk was in tears when that happened, because that was the state of the clock when it came down. And they threw it out to the window. Yeah, they threw it out. The workers threw it out the window, and thinking it's all rusty. It's just a load of rubbish. You know, why are we going to carry it 5 stories down? It's easier to push it through there. So I was asked to go and see. You could see it smangled, the gears were broken, everything. And he says, can you restore this? And I said, how many years have I got? I said, no, I really don't want to do this. I said, it would just take so long. He said, doesn't matter, whatever it costs, whatever it is, can you do it? I said, I don't really want to do it. So I walked away from it, and probably 10 years later, he asked me to go and see him again. And he said, we tried to get people to do it. He said, nobody will touch it. Can you please have a go at it? So he wore me down. I said, yes. So we had to straighten every little piece was taken apart and straightened out and welded together to put it, because some parts were broken. And what you see on the table there is that's the complete clock stripped down. That's about 6 months' work for me to get the clock in that state. And this is the workshop I had. This was away from the monastery, and hopefully, if I can, now I need to come out of this a minute. All right, okay. This is a little video I want to show you, but I'm not sure if I can. Pen highlighter. Right. I just want to. Yeah. I just want to. No. I just want to take the laser out a minute. Go back to, so I can.
If you press it again, it'll disappear.
Right. Now that should be a video. Can I play this? I don't know. Ah, there we go. So if you've never seen a polio clock, probably you won't see one. So the pendulum is horizontal, and all you're looking at here is half of the clock, the bit that runs the dial. The other half is the strike that strikes the bell, strikes the hours. So this is when I just got the clock running. And what drives this clock is a big rock at the bottom. You see this rock? Let's see if I can get the laser back up again. Yeah, okay. Right. Now this clock is over 600 years old. It's a mechanism that's very, very impressive to see going, and not many people will see these clocks. Probably if you go to the British Museum, they have one on display there. So this bit here, oh, I can't, sorry. This disappeared. Okay, we'll just run this for a while. So this is where you wind it. The ropes lift up this stone weight, which is at the bottom. And that's the way you wind it, is you raise the stone up, and it will run down over a period of time. Oh, great. Okay. Okay. This is another model. This is now in the tower. So that's where the clock would go. And I designed a platform for it. And this was going to be closed in because these windows are usually left open so the bells could be heard throughout the monastery. So this was going to be the enclosure for the clock when it was finished. And in fact, it is. It is being built now. Okay. No. I don't know what it's saying there. Right. Okay. That's the clock in place. And the clocks, the weights go up to the ceiling and then drop down again because the floor area was limited there. That's as far below the floor there is another room, whereas originally the weights would have fallen down by 10, 20 meters through the floor. But because they're using that, we've taken the weights to the ceiling and then dropped them down again. I don't know. Right. Now I'm stuck.
The other thing popped up. You just have to click on that. There you
go. Okay. Oh. Now, right. The drive for the clock comes up through there, and that is the dial is just behind there. Okay. And I think I'm going to wind the clock now. Oh, there you go. I'm just going to show you how they wind this thing. Okay. So you usually somebody has to go up there every day to wind the clock. And what we're doing there is lifting the weight from the base, which is probably down here somewhere, lifting that straight up. Okay. And this is what it looks like on the outside. Now, we did have an early photograph from about, I think about 18, no, maybe 1930s, and there was a dial up there. Looks similar to that. We could see the case in, but the dial wasn't very visible. But this is what I envisaged it would look like. So I designed the dial to that sort of style. We put that up. Again, this is a very small, compared to the height above ground, the dial is quite small, but that was what was there in the first place, and that's what we put back up. And it's very precarious working up there. You know, there's not a lot holding you down there, and sometimes you're lucky you got these background rails, not even those. Right, I'm just going to go on to the next one a moment. This is the monastery of Iveron, and this was another mammoth project which took about 6 months. I was there for 6 months. And we have the old dial there, remnants of the old dial. This is very early photograph. And up here we have an automaton, or sometimes they call a clock jack, and he strikes the bell on the hour. So he would strike 3 at 3 o'clock, 4, and so on. And this is before I did the restoration. You can see the jack here quite plainly. Now, the other thing you notice with this guy, he's black. And most of the jacks on Mount Athos, and there were a few, they used to call him Oarapis. And there is a reason for that. You know, we're not allowed to have statues in the Orthodox Church, and this is a statue. And the reason we can't have statues, we can't venerate them, but being Arab, I guess the religion, and you can't say that for everybody, but their religion would not be sort of Christian or non-Christian, it would be non-Christian, and therefore, I guess that could have been one of the reasons why you always had what they call an Arab as the automaton to strike the bell. Now, he strikes every hour, so it was 10, he would strike 10 times. So he had a hammer in his hand, and in one hand, and a bell in the other. So he'd be like this, and he would just strike the bell. Now, some of the visitors to Iveron took offense to this black guy up there, and he was quite frightening, actually. He looked like a demon, to be quite honest. And yeah, you could see that, and you would frighten kids showing them that, I've got to be honest. Now, they decided we were going to restore this guy and put him back up, and they decided we're not going to make him black anymore. He's going to be European. And that's what they did. But they made him a little bit too white, I think. And what you see here is two of the fathers. You can demonstrate how large this guy is. I'm trying to think. This is Father Prodemos, who passed away a few years ago, sadly. And this is in the museum at the base of the monastery, where some of the tools, you can see some of the old tools are being held there. So when he went back, he was a light chocolate color, I can tell you that. Yeah. Okay. Now, this is the clock, in Iveron, and this is the largest clock on Mount Athos. It's huge. It's really big. We had to dismantle this, take it down, and dismantle the bench. The bench to hold this weighs half a ton. But before I got to the monastery to look at this, the bench was taken down and burnt because they had money to buy a new one, and that's what they did, which was a great shame. And this is, again, it's another video I want to show you of the clock running. So let's see if we can get this up. Yeah. Click the right arrow. Okay. You've got some of the fathers here and the abbot. This is the first time. Sorry, I'll just turn it down a bit. Can I turn it down? I want to turn the volume down a bit. Is it? Oh. Okay. Oh, this clock has 3 weights, and they weigh 100 kilos each. So it's very difficult, and you have to wind this every sort of 2 days. Yeah. It's a huge machine, this, and when it strikes the bells, the whole floor vibrates. And now this is the old abbot, Father Alexios. Vasilios, yes, sorry, Father Vasilios. Father Prodamos. Yesterday. No, that was stripped down. That was like the other bits on the table. Yeah. This is Father Christophoros, I think, is it? Do you recognize it? Yeah, Father Christophoros, yeah. And the abbot is behind him, yes. You just have to wait a bit, and we get this thing to run. And I don't know if I can accelerate this a bit. No, it's a few minutes. See this little guy behind him? This little guy here. Right. When I was working there, the weights, we just made the weights, nearly 100 kilos each. And I asked him, can you bring them to the top of the tower? Because I thought they were... And this guy is a very, very small guy. And he brought the 3 weights up to the top of the tower, gasping. And I just realized I forgot, I had to put the metal hooks on there. So they had to go back to the workshop. So I had to tell him to take them back down with a very apologetic voice, which he did, and never said a word. Yeah. Now, these monks, this is the first time they've seen this clock working, and they were like kids in a toy shop. And they got really excited towards the end when you see it working, see it, the bells ringing. And behind here is the abbot, the current abbot of the monastery. Did you meet Father Prodamos? Yeah, he's a lovely guy. Yeah. Right, I think it's going to strike in a minute now.
έχουν τις ράφτες να δουλέψουν. Τώρα, όταν βγουν αυτά τα δύο βαρύδια και δουλεύει το ρολόι, η συγχρονία από το ρολόι.
I couldn't adjust these slides when I had them because I just had a few on my computer. So we're lucky we got these to work with, really. But I think it's just about finished. This is now.
Και ο Αράπης θα χτυπάει κάθε ώρα. Είναι όλες αυτές.
You watch these monks now. They're amazed, you know, this, wow. I like the expression on their faces when they see it running. Now the Arab is actually striking, you can't hear that inside, but he's striking the bell outside now. So if you were in the courtyard, you'd be able to hear the time being struck. Yeah.
Is the one there as well?
Which monastery?
Saint Sabbath Monastery in the Palestine desert.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Okay.
Spiro, can I ask, why is this clock so much more complicated than the previous one? It's got more gears, the gears are bigger, why does it have 3 weights?
Because this clock strikes the quarter hours. Most of the clocks that you see, the other ones that you see, are usually 2 trains. So one tells the time, and the other one strikes the hours. But this one strikes the quarters. So those bells that you heard going around then, they strike every quarter, and then they strike double on the half hour, 3 times on the 3/4 hour, and 4 times on the hour, plus you would have all the bells striking for the number of hours. And this was a 24-hour clock, so at hour 24 it would strike 24 times as well. It would drive the monks mad to see this thing going every day. And yeah, so and also
you need more wheels, more gears.
There's three trains, one for the clock going, one for the quarters, strikes the hours, and the other one for the Arab to strikes the hour. The other one just plays a tune. Yeah.
So the mechanism of that, is it what's in here? Is it similar to what's in here?
A little bit more complicated because you don't have bells striking on that one. Yeah. Yeah. Now, yeah, so they were quite complicated clocks. You basically had a computer on there that, was able to count all the hours that it was striking. This is another clock that I'm just showing an example because this doesn't exist anymore, with another Arab. So this is another monastery with an Arab, and this is a 24-hour dial, Xeropotamos. It doesn't exist anymore. We don't know where the clock is. They're very sort of peculiar about you going there asking questions. They don't like it, so I don't go there. But what is interesting is that this is another one of the clocks where we have a 24-hour dial and we have yet another Arab striking the hours. Yeah. And well, yeah, whatever. This was the first clock I restored on Mount Athos. This is a very early one in the monastery of Azzopardi. Well, in those days, when I was younger, I used to backpack everywhere and walk the length of Mount Athos. And I damaged my knee on this occasion when I arrived at Azzopardi, and I couldn't walk for about a week. So I said to them, first of all, can I have a look at your clocks? And they said yes. Going up to the clock tower, we went up there and had a look. And underneath the stairs, I found this machine. I said, do you know what this machine is? He said, we think it's an old clock. I said, look, whilst I'm here, would you like me to sort of work on it and restore it for you? And they said yes. So this was the first clock I restored. And this is the clock, sorry, that was before. But this is very early. It's before 1400. It's somewhere between around about 1300. So this is probably the oldest clock on Mount Athos. This has been converted to pendulum. So we don't have the folio up that goes back and forth. This is a pendulum clock. And that's what used to happen to most of the clocks on Mount Athos. So, but it is one of the oldest ones.
Cast iron?
No, it's wrought iron, which is quite wrought iron. Yeah, it's a metal which with lots of impurities in it, but it's quite resilient to rust, quite resilient to knocks and throwing from five-story towers. It's a good material to work with. Yeah, it's one of the early sort of metals that they used there.
So how did they cast the pieces?
They weren't cast. They weren't cast. They were forged. With hammers. Yeah. And the more you forge them, the more impurities you get out, the better the quality of the steel or the metal. All by hand.
By hand?
Yeah.
Filing them into the shape.
Cutting them by hand into the shape. And that's the way I used to do them when I was making new parts, and they would all be done by traditional methods. Yeah. This was the clock in Azzopardi Tower, and that was the clock that was working. And this is a Greek clock. This was made in Greece. Around about, I think possibly around about 50s, 40s, but that was the clock that was running. And the monastery had another clock, which they had they acquired in 1805, and that came from Vienna. And it's been sitting there for many, many years, and they asked me to restore this and replace the clock that was there, which I did. Oh, this one's going. So this was a 3 train, again, at the quarter hours, it would strike the quarters and had 3 weights. Now, the monks in this monastery, they were not very happy in winding this clock. And this clock ran for about 18 months. And they said, no, we can't cope with this. It's too much hard work for us. Can you please restore the old clock and put that back up again? So that was my next task, is to take this clock down and restore the old one that was there and put that back up. This was a lovely clock, and it was a shame to take that back down after we seen it. We spent a lot of time getting this going.
Is the weight beneath the floor?
The weights were beneath the floor, and they go right through two stories. This one has got heavy weights. The weights. They have to wind the 3 of them up every day. Yeah. So I'm just going to go to the next one now. So this is the other clock. This is the clock in the restored state.
Looks like it uses more modern materials.
Well, yes, it's 20th century clock, made in Greece, made in Athens. Beautiful clock, but very modern. This is probably one of the most modern clocks I had to work with. So the bells for the bells were just on top, because this is a clock tower, not a bell tower. The bell tower was the big tower we've seen earlier with the sundial. and I won't keep you much longer with that. So there's the old clock. That was just set to the corner to one side. Right, now let's go on to the next one. That's my grandson, and he had an opportunity. We were doing some cataloguing of the clocks, and I was spending 10 days in Azzopardi, and I was able to take him with me, and he thoroughly enjoyed it. We spent some quality time together, and he helped me doing some of the cataloguing as well, so he was very useful, and we had a great time. Here we go, there's the Arab again, and this is the Azzopardi Arab. He has been, rather than restore the original one, they wanted to keep him as he was, and they carved out a new one. You can see he's full size, this guy. And the sculptor who did that, he was a fantastic guy, very, very capable, and he did some great work.
What type of wood did they use?
They used oak. Yeah. The best wood that we could find. And my job was to put the guy up, put the Arab back up, and this guy is black, so he's authentic and true to his. This is one of my friends who was helping me. The other thing that we did on this clock was I did the dial, designed a new dial, because the old one looked like a station clock. I designed this clock, and we put this one up. We put the Arab up and restored the whole tower. So there's the clock that was, that's the clock that originally came off, and I designed the other one with no Roman numerals. The only problem is some of the monks couldn't read that. They couldn't, yeah, they couldn't read no Roman numerals. Yeah, no. They said, this is foreign to us. What is it? What's the number? I don't understand these numbers. What was beautiful about this, when we removed that, underneath, you see the original dial. This dial that you see there was put on there in the 1700s. And that was the period that the tower was built above the church, this tower. And that's the original numerals that were there when it was built. And they're not numerals, they're just markers. We've got these two lines all the way around the clock, so that there were no recognizable numerals to speak of. And finally, I was up there. Now, the only way in and out of there is precarious through this little window. So you take your life in your hands when you're up in these places. So we put in the final touches to the dial. When I was painting this dial the night before we put it up, I was working quite late, and I got to the 6 and the 7 and realized after I painted them, they were back to front. So I had to rub those out again and start again. So that's my memory of that dial. And there's the dial. What we did with this is put a stainless steel plate around. You can just see the outline there to cover the original numerals, so we didn't destroy any of those. And that was the finished tower when we finished it. And just finishing off now, just to show you the last few things. Besides the big things that we used to work on, Mount Athos is famous for clock making these small brass dial clocks for the monks, and most of these are alarm clocks. In the center there you see an alarm which could be set to ring a bell and wake you up at any hour you have to go to church or whatever. The other thing you notice, they only have one hand because these clocks weren't very accurate, so they were only accurate to, like a few minutes a day, So these divisions there are quarters, and so you haven't got minutes to show you 5. So we've got 4 quarters there. And on there we have the name of the maker, who was a monk, and it says by the hand of Gabriel, monk, 1877, number 30, clock number 30. There was an industry in Carriers on Mount Athos that were making these. There was 3 workshops, and they were making copies of English clocks. These were clocks that were made in the 1700s in England, and they just took one and started making them. But they carried on making them to sort of late 1800s, towards the end of 1800s, which is really unusual. The earliest one that I found, was, this is at Yveron, and this is dated 1743. That's the earliest that we found. On top it says Ayo Oros, and I don't know if anybody can read that from up down there. At the bottom it says Monachos Gerasimos. So that's the name of the monk who built this clock. That is a beautiful. Father Hermias restored this, and it looks a lot better than it is. You see it there now. It's a beautiful clock. That is one of the best clock treasures of Yveron. And these are some of the clocks in Yveron that were in the basement. Most of these have been taken out of there now. Father Jeremiah has done a fantastic job in saving a lot of these clocks that were in a basement, being subjected to rust and corrosion, and he saved those. And now most of these are in the bell tower, in the clock tower, which is a safer space and not so much damp in there. And also some of the good ones, the brass style ones, are in the library. And finally, this is another collection. There are 2 people key in this, in these collection of clocks. One is Father Prodamos, who collected everything there, no matter what, and just put it in the museum. He didn't know what they were, but it doesn't matter. They were there, and he kept them safe. And the other person was Father Jeremiah, who'd taken these and taken them out of the damp places and put them in a safe place. Did a lot of restoration. I spent weeks and weeks training him what to do, and he just took it on board, and he did a fantastic job. And most of these clocks now are safe and conserved thanks to him and Father Prodamos. And from that, I think that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for
Yes, but by all means ask. By all means ask questions.
I was going to ask, how's your relationship with Father Jeremiah? How did you meet him, and how did he express interest in clock making?
Well, when I first went to Mount Athos, the first place I went was Yveron. And everybody, when you go to those monasteries and you say to them, can I have a look? Do you have clocks? Can I have a look at them? They shy away, and they don't want to know. If they don't know you, you've got it's very difficult to see anything. And I found it took me 5 years before people will let you, once they got to know you, it's different. But then I went there. So when I went to Yveron, I asked the question is, can I go up in the tower and see the tower clock, please? I'm sorry, no, if we're too busy, or, we haven't got time now. And Father Jeremiah was there, and he said to me, during the service, he said, I'll meet you at the door. I'll take you up and show you the clocks. So we went up, and I was blown away, because this is this big clock we've seen there. I've seen this, and wow, So I said, Father, can I take some photos? I said, is it allowed to take some photos? He said, oh no, he said, photos are not allowed. He said, but I'm going to turn around, he said, I'm not looking, he said. You do what you think best. So I took some photos. 15 years later, I was up there restoring that clock. And some of the photos that I took at the time, not that time, but also after that, they were photos that were useful, because when they destroyed that tower, in terms of they were going to rebuild it, they destroyed all evidence of drawings that were all over the walls. And I took photographs of those, and they were destroyed. So there was no archaeology done at that time. And likewise, they destroyed the bench that the clock was sitting on, and there was nothing wrong with it, really. And they burnt it. So we spent weeks making a new bench, which was half a ton, made by hand, to replace what was there, and there was no need for it, really. So he was So from that time, when I was working there, he took some interest in what I was doing, because he wasn't involved with the clocks at the time. There were other people involved, and took some interest, and he used to come and see me, and what are you doing? And I used to say to him, I said, Father, those clocks that are down in the basement, we need to pull those out. I said, somebody needs to take charge and take those out to save them. And I think he took that on board. And then he was given the task of looking after the library and looking after the clocks, because at this time Father Prodamos was retiring, he wasn't well, and he took that. And he said, well, what do I do? What am I going to do with these? So I said, right, come with me. So I started training him. We spent weeks and weeks training him how to silver the dials, how to clean them, and not do too much. You didn't have to repair them. It's conserving what was there. It was the main thing. And whether they worked or not, it didn't really matter. And he took it on board, and he done a fantastic job. But not only the clocks, he moved on to arms, all the guns and things that they have there. He carried on doing those, and yeah, he's done a fantastic job. Yeah.
Have arms. Have arms.
Yes. Yeah, those monasteries were attacked by pirates, so they had to protect themselves. So there was cannons, there was guns. Yeah.
Any other questions?
How did you get into it?
I was interested in clocks when I was 20. I started. I bought a couple of antique clocks, took them apart. But being my background being engineering, it was easy for me. But not only that, I was interested in the history. I've written quite a few articles on the clocks of Mount Athos for some Greek journals as well that exist. So the history is the main part. And doing this work there enables me to study the items and study the history better than just looking at photographs from there. So it was a great opportunity. And one of the things that came out, some of those clocks that I restored, I found 5 clocks that had the same characteristics. There was one mechanism that doesn't exist anywhere else in Europe, only on Mount Athos, and identified these on 5 tower clocks, which means that these clocks were all made in the same workshop, and I believe they were made on Mount Athos. And that was a discovery that was not known before anywhere in Europe and anywhere on clockmaking. Yeah.
Who were the best clockmakers of the time?
The best clockmakers were English clocks were the best clocks, and that's why they copied the monks on Mount Athos copied them. They were one of the best clockmakers in the early times. Yeah. But clocks, these tower clocks, they came out of the monasteries of Europe. Somebody there, nobody knows, but the first clock was 1000 and in the 1200s, 1280. 1282 we recognized the first mechanical clock. Before that, they didn't exist. But they came out of Europe, somewhere in one of the monasteries in Europe. We don't know where. We don't know the country. No. It could have been anywhere, but it was in a monastery, because that's where time was important. To organize the daily routine in the monastery, you needed good timekeeping. Yeah.